It was probably the most vulnerable conversation we've had together about sex at that point in our marriage, partially because we don't talk about it. We just do it. My biggest worry in my conversation with my wife was, what if I'm not a good enough lover and she just hasn't told me so? Like maybe she's secretly wishing I was better in bed and she just hadn't voiced that.
Welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I'm your host, Dan Purcell, a Christian marriage and intimacy expert and coach. I'm on a mission to help couples have the best sex and most emotionally intimate marriages possible. Our episodes cover topics you've always wondered about and are packed with practical advice designed to help you take your marriage to the next level. For most couples, there's a lot of hot passion and excitement during the early dating and engagement time, and for a while after the wedding. But over time, we develop routines, scripts, and become habituated to each other. This is normal and serves a good purpose. However, herein lies the challenge. How do you create an intimate marriage with lots of passion long term? This is the very thing I research, teach, and coach about in my program and at my retreats. And I was a guest on the Redhead Reveal podcast. The host, Jenn, is a marriage and family therapist out of Houston, and I had a great conversation with her about navigating intimacy in long-term marriages. And this is the episode that we recorded that I want to release with you today. In this episode, we're going to answer the questions such as, why is it hard to keep sex passionate when you've been married for a long time? What can couples do to create an environment for passion to thrive? What is validation-seeking behavior, and how does that tend to interfere with a healthy, intimate relationship? And a lot of other great golden nuggets that you'll find in this episode. Before we dive into the interview, could you please take a moment and pause this podcast and leave a review on Apple Podcasts? Like what the following person did. She wrote, "My husband and I are newly married, and the Intimately Us app was recommended by a friend, and we will be forever grateful. Through the app, I came across the podcast, and I love that he talks about topics usually left in the dark. We've learned so much." If you hear your review read on this show, email support@getyourmarriageon.com, and I'll mail you a fun gift as a way of saying thank you. In a few weeks, on July 12 through 13, we're hosting a virtual lovemaking retreat. This is perfect for a couple that wants to experience something new and sexually wonderful in their marriage. This is where you join my wife Emily and I live, either from a hotel room or send the kids to grandma's house and join us from your home. We'll meet live Friday night, Saturday morning, and Saturday night, and we will guide you through a step-by-step practice that will be absolutely unforgettable. If you can't attend that weekend, a recording will be available for a few months afterwards. So go ahead and register now, and you can find more details on our website at getyourmarriageon.com. And in October, we're hosting our next in-person marriage retreat, and these retreats are awesome and amazing. This is ideal for couples that are in otherwise happy marriages, but wish things were better in the intimacy department. Our retreats are absolutely not boring and nothing like being in a stuffy conference room. This is more like a vacation, a getaway, a romantic getaway for you and your spouse, where you get to work with me to do a deep dive into your marriage relationship. I know some of you hearing this would rather eat your toenails than travel to a new place to talk about the most private and perhaps frustrating aspect of your marriage. But I promise you that this is a safe environment. I've been doing these retreats for years. But you don't have to take my word for it. You can check out our many interviews of couples on my website, and they describe what their experience was like at the retreats. And all those details are on my website, getyourmarriageon.com. And now for the conversation with Jennifer Pinkerton.
All right, everybody, I've got an exciting guest today. Dan Purcell is joining us, and he is going to talk about sex and sex coaching, relationships. We've got it here for you today. So, Dan, I'm going to start off with just hitting the ground running. What do you think keeps people from having great sex?
Oh man, there's so many reasons for that. It could be health reasons. It could be just issues in the relationship not working. It could be time of the month, hormones. That also plays a part. Like our biology plays a part of it. And it can also just mean like the sex they're having just isn't as appealing than watching a show or folding laundry. So it could be all sorts of reasons why couples struggle.
And I'm gonna agree with you on that last part. When we're talking about the intention behind sex, I think so often couples end up missing the mark because that intention of prioritizing it and making it something that everybody's excited about and focused on really can be a detriment, can be a problem in a relationship.
Yeah, definitely. And it's really, you got to examine the meanings that are at play. I believe sex is a very powerful language.
Mhm.
There's so much communicated in the way we touch each other, in the way we interact with each other, especially I can't think of anything more vulnerable, more exposing of ourselves than being in a sexual, because it speaks to the core of who we are too. Our
That's right.
sexuality is so core to who we are. So we tend to put up little walls or only show certain sides of ourselves in a relationship anyway, and those get magnified in the way you play out your sexual relationship.
Exactly, and those little walls, as you say, I like that descriptor. It sounds so much nicer than what I usually reference as our trauma responses, but it ends up
Yes,
being the
that's
same thing. We bring
uh-huh.
in so much of our baggage, so much of our experiences, so much of the things that hurt us, and I think that they can be so limiting in how we show up sexually, and they really do hold us back.
Definitely. Yeah, yeah.
So, thinking about the things you said, some of the reasons that people may not have a great sex life, what are some ideas that you think can really be the twist, really be the fundamental shift that changes that?
Well, I can tell you a little story for me, I
Let's hear
guess,
the
if
story.
I can.
Shoot.
So I've got lots of stories, by the way, in this area, because this is what I study, and I'm my number one most difficult client to coach is myself. So
Aren't we all, Dan?
yeah, exactly. So for someone like me, I highly value my sexual relationship with my wife. I want it to be great. It's something that we both put a lot of effort in, and we make it a priority. But there are some times when, because it matters so much to me, I tend to make it mean too much to me that she can't have an opinion different than me. I can't tolerate the idea that
Mhm.
she might not like something that I like, for
Yeah.
example.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so the other day we tried something new and I was in heaven. We both had a great time. I thought we both had a great time.
Mhm.
And we're cleaning up together. We're standing in the shower and I noticed this tendency in me of I put on the salesman hat. I want to like sell her on what a great experience we had because it's a
Oh.
threat to me if she didn't like the new thing we just did, right? It hurts my sense of ego and my pride.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
my default go-to strategy is just immediately talking about, and what I'm actually doing is I'm manipulating her. It's
Mhm.
not a kind thing to do. It's not a great thing to do. My go-to is like planting ideas in her head. Wasn't that great? Wasn't it good? Wasn't that fantastic? Wasn't this?
Mhm.
And it's not so much that I'm exposing for me how much I enjoyed it. There's really the sense behind the message that you need to like this too, because I need you to like it so that I'm happy with myself. So
Mhm.
what I'm really asking her is to prop up my ego in my communication. It may not sound like that if you looked at a transcript of in the words, but that's the message behind the message.
And
Anyway, I did a different move this time. I bit my tongue. And this is hard to do because you got to settle yourself down. Because, like, I really want to hear from her how great that was or how good of a lover I am. That's what it really is coming down to, right? Right. I want to hear that. But when you depend on it, then you start doing things to control your spouse to get the outcome you want. And no one likes being controlled. And the sad thing is, the way our brains work and research backs us up, we can sense our spouse doing these moves on us way more clearly than we ourselves know that we're doing it to someone else.
Mhm.
Like we're far more clear about mapping other people's minds than our own minds.
Mhm.
But this moment was an exception. I bit my tongue and I settled myself down. And
Mhm.
then it has a happy ending because she started talking about how much she enjoyed the new thing we did and that we're going to do it again and everything. So it had a happy outcome. But
Mhm.
that's like an example, like with your question, how do couples really deal with the sexual interaction on that level? It's when we are so validation seeking, especially through sex, to the point where we demand it from others, it plants the seeds to a lot of problems that I see couples have in their sexual relationship.
That's great. You mentioned 2 words I grabbed onto that I love hearing. You talked about effort and you talked
Hmm.
about ego. And I think those 2 things have a really big place and what our sexual outcome is gonna look like. Is the effort there? Are both parties interested in putting forth that effort and intent? And is ego in the way?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
And it's something I think we have to be conscious of how that shows up for us in a
Right.
social interaction,
Yeah,
for sure.
exactly. Right.
You had this background in software development as I was reading your bio, but now you help couples with their sex life. So tell me about that. How did you get from one place to another in this?
I know this sounds so like oil and water. They don't mix, right? Such a wild story. So my background's in software development, my degree's in computer science, but I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. Right out of college, I started a business
Mhm.
and we develop apps for businesses all over the world. 13 years into my marriage, my own marriage went through a big change. It went from where it was to a whole new level. And it was such a fundamental change in me and with my wife that I really wanted to share what I was learning with the world. But at the time, I didn't think I was a good public speaker. I'm kind of shy. I'm introverted. I'm a thinker. I can think about things, but I'm not a good writer. So I don't want to write a book or a blog or anything like that. But I can write an app because that's what I do all day. Or I run a team that builds apps alongside with me. So we made a bedroom game app, mostly to scratch my own itch because we wanted to have more fun in the bedroom. And if all these game ideas that I had in my head, if they're in an app digital form, then I can update them quickly and we can always add on new features and things like that. So we made that game and we put it on the App Store. And to our surprise, it really took off. Lots of people started downloading it, sharing with their married friends or whatever. And all of a sudden, I kind of got a following all around this app. And then I started getting questions from people, and I don't know how to say no to people. So, sure, I'll investigate the answer to your question, and I'm answering sex questions and relationship questions. And I was hooked. Like, I think I found my calling in life doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And a year later, where we live in a town about 200,000 people, and there's conferences and events for all sorts of things, but there's nothing for marriage enrichment. And we thought it'd be really good if our town had something like that. So I was talking to a friend of mine. He's a therapist, a well-known therapist in town. And I told him, you should put on a conference for married couples. And because he puts on a conference for couples in distress, going through like pornography, disclosure, betrayal, like affair betrayal. He puts on a little conference like that. But like, no. Like a marriage enrichment conference. It's about, how to make a good thing great, like something along those lines. And he's like, you should do that, Dan. And he challenged me to do it. And I took his challenge. So we put on a conference and we had 550 people attend our first event. And that was mind blowing to me. And as couples were walking out holding hands and talking about what a great experience they had at the event, that's the day I really felt like I got the shot in the arm. This is what I want to do for a living. I want to help couples kind of learn how to get the tools they need so they can communicate better. They can really build a stronger intimate relationship, not just a functional relationship, and to get the education they need so they can really thrive in their relationship. And that's when Get Your Marriage On was born in that sense.
I think what I hear also you saying is that you created this sense of novelty and adventure that was available
Uh,
to people to anonymously get. And that's the thing. A lot of people aren't comfortable with saying, hey, our sex life is in a rut, or our sex life is stale, or we're not feeling very connected anymore. And so, by means of this app, you gave them an opportunity to approach it with a sense of curiosity and novelty. And that's something
yes,
that I always talk about. If we could look at our sex life in that way, with a sense of curiosity and a sense of how fun this can be. And if it's not fun, then it's up to us to make it fun again. Just like
right.
anything, we're always going to get out of things what we put into it. And we can't expect our relationship sexually to prosper and thrive and be amazing if we're not putting any work into it. And I love the vehicle that you provided for people to be able to do that. So once again, I want to mention that. I think it's called Intimately Us and Just Between Us, right? Those are the two apps?
Yes, those are two apps.
That's
Yep.
awesome. That's
The
awesome.
first one, Intimately Us, is the bedroom game,
Mhm.
and Just Between Us is a chat app just for couples.
Okay.
My friends call it's the ultimate sexting app, but
Great. Love
that's
it. I'm
Just
going to have
Between
to
Us.
check this out.
Mhm.
So, with the big reasons about why people struggle with sex, we touched on some of those. But in this situation, for instance, at this retreat or structured intensive basically that you did, what
Mhm.
did you see was one of the biggest reasons that people would say they're struggling? What did they view that as from their point of view?
I think the magic of it was people are struggling, but because people don't talk about it, like what you said, they assume everyone else is fine and they're just the only ones in the world struggling. Therefore, when they come to an event like this and they look around and there's hundreds of others kind of in the same boat, all of a sudden there's this like sense of unity, this sense of camaraderie. I don't know what you call it, fortitude in numbers. And they're like, oh, we're not the only ones. We're
It's
normal.
community. It's community
Yes,
and
that's
validation
exactly what it is.
and
Uh-huh.
normalization. It's normalized.
Yes.
We're not weird because we're bored in our sex life. It's normalizing. I
Yes.
still love my husband, love my wife, whatever the situation of the relationship is. The love is there, but we're just bored. And it doesn't mean I don't want to be with you. It means we need to make this fun again.
Yes, exactly. And realizing, oh, we're in the same boat with all these other people, all of a sudden it reduces the anxiety around the topic. And you can laugh about it now. You can approach it with curiosity and openness. And I think that's the magic of things like that.
I often say that if you can't talk about sex, then why are you having it?
Yeah, like that's a good line. That's a good one-liner. Uh-huh.
And it's true because think about how much more connection there would be, intimately, if we could say to our partner, if everybody felt comfortable saying, hey, I don't like that, or, when you do this, I really love that, or have you ever considered doing this? But I think so many couples approach that with shame or blame or guilt or feeling, as though it's going to create a fight. It's going to create conflict. And to me, if people could change their perspective, if there could be this small pivot, this small shift to think, it's perfectly okay for my partner to say, hey, let's do something different and not internalize that and make it about someone's deficit or someone's lack of, looking at a strength-based perspective that, hey, let's always talk about this and make this more fun and more exciting. And let's look at what we can do to change things up.
Mm-hmm. And I like what you're saying, but I think for many people listening to this, they're going to say, easier said than done.
I agree. But it's people like you having these apps, people like you having this podcast, Get Your Marriage On podcast you have, and where I sit, the amount of people I work with as well in this space, I think that that's what creates that pivot because again, it's normalizing it. It's saying, hey, it does not mean you do not have a great relationship. It just means we can improve it in the bedroom or the kitchen
Right.
or the bathroom or the car or wherever else.
Yes, all the places.
For sure.
I have a story about that too, if
Tell
that's
me.
helpful for you or for your listeners. So our sex life changed tremendously when a friend had a conversation with me and he opened up about his sex life. And he was telling me all the fun things he and his wife were doing in bed. And I was blushing the whole time. I was uncomfortable with the conversation at the time. But I was uncomfortable that I was uncomfortable. But part of what he was telling me was he had to learn how to be a better lover in the bedroom. And he wasn't telling me these things to boast, but he was just saying, like, hey, Dan, once our sex life improved, our whole relationship improved. We're communicating better. We're parenting together better. Just everything in life just seems to be clicking better because we got this aspect of our relationship improved. And I believed him, and I could see he had something I didn't have. And like you said, it's easier to have sex than talk about sex, right? So I went home that night to my wife, said, hey, you'd never believe what kind of conversation I had today. And I had such a hard time talking about our sex life at that point. It was probably the most vulnerable conversation we've had together about sex at that point in our marriage, partially because we don't talk about it. We just do it. And I think for a lot of couples, it's easier to do it because you're just maintaining the status quo, and it's easier to kick a problem, like a kicking the can down the road, than to just stop and deal with it. Or you may not think it's a problem. My biggest worry in my conversation with my wife was, what if I'm not a good enough lover and she just hasn't told me so? Like maybe she's secretly wishing I was better in bed and she just hadn't voiced that. So like,
Stop you there, Dan, because that is correct. Right there, I have to say that question, that what if it's me? What if they think I'm a bad lover? What if I'm the problem? I think that you hit the nail on the head is really the biggest problem, is that there's this instant personalization that it's because of me. And it's that insecurity creeps in. Those
yeah.
responses creep in. It's the feeling of I'm less than, I'm not good enough. And those can be such core wounds for people. that they don't recognize how it's holding them back sexually. And if people could recognize, okay, this is not a personal attack on me. This is an opportunity for us to instead be having amazing sex. And that attitude change, I think, is really a big thing that so many people miss out on.
Yes, I like you said, like, a core wound. Looking back is a core wound, but in the moment, I'm not using that language to identify what it is. But the attitude change you just talked about, like, no, this is an opportunity for things to get better. That gave both of us courage to have this vulnerable conversation that we spent up. We were up like 4 or 5 hours that night talking
Love
about
hearing
all the things, and that so it is that attitude. We're happy, we're operating, we're doing okay, but what do you think about, pulling back the curtain a little bit? Tell me more of what you think. Tell me more about what you feel. Just genuine curiosity here. What do you think about it? What do you think about this or X, Y, or Z? And taking inventory because we never really talked about it to that point. What are your thoughts and attitudes about this? What about that time I did this? How did that affect you? And just learning from each other in this open way plowed fertile ground for us to plant anew and kind of grow in a new direction from there.
And that requires a sense of emotional safety. That requires somebody saying, I trust my partner enough that I can have this conversation and it's not going to go south. It's not going to be a war. We're not going to be in a huge fight now. Someone's not going to be threatening divorce because they think that I'm a horrible lover. It requires a sense of safety as I trust that my partner is here with me. They're in the trenches with me and they're curious enough. They're invested enough in me and my pleasure and my interest that they want to know, what do I want to do? What have I always thought about? What sounds great to me? What doesn't sound great to me? What is a definite yuck for me versus a yum for me? And that conversation is I think can be a mind-blowing change of what it looks like sexually.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess we did have that going for us. We had a very secure relationship. We're great friends. We date often. We're invested in each other's lives. So it made conversations like that helpful. But if that's not you in your stage of the relationship yet, invest in it. Like make basic communication, basic fun, time for fun and play, just things that you both enjoy. Make that a part of your relationship routine somehow. Make the effort to do it. And it might mean some lifestyle changes, but make the effort to make margin for play together. I think that's
On
how you
that
get there.
topic of play, I suggest to couples often that they're missing out if they don't have these conversations because it is a sexually charged environment. If we have a date night where we're talking about sex, we're talking about, hey, have you ever thought about this? Or, hey, I was watching this and this seemed hot to me. Or, hey, I heard so and so, they told me they were doing this. What do you think about that? It is almost like this free foreplay that we're handing our partner on a platter, and it can be really fun. It can be really engaging, and it is an energy shift in how that date goes. Because otherwise, if you're struggling to not be on your phone and you're struggling to have to stare at each other and make conversation, to me, if you don't know what else to talk about, why aren't you talking about that? Because it creates a fun date. It creates a sense of, hey, let's go home and start putting some of this into action.
Uh-huh. And I've been there where you're on the date and this is like, well, we've already talked about all the things there are to talk about, and we're just left with the leftovers of things we don't talk about. And
Exactly.
that's what I built into the Intimately Yes app. There is a huge section dedicated to conversation starters. So if you're on a date, you don't have to, well, pull out your phone just for the app, but you don't have to scroll Instagram and disconnect from each other. We can engage in conversations using these hundreds of conversation starter prompts in various categories.
I encourage people to either buy card decks or things like that. So to me, this app is a much better solution from that. And it really gives them something they can easily engage with together. And I think when there's a focus that you can do jointly, it makes everything seem so much more fun because you're both so invested in it.
Yeah, love
So
it.
what is the biggest feedback that you get? Like, let's go to this big event you put on. Let's go back to that for a second. What did you find that was one of them, maybe whether it's educational or tools, what's something else that you felt like people took away from that they thought was really valuable that you could share with everybody here that's listening today? It's kind of like a free tip of something they need to know and do.
Oh, I love that. And it's fresh on my mind because we just wrapped up our annual couples retreat last weekend.
Great.
So we had 20 couples because it's small and intimate from all over the country. And it was 4 days and 3 nights of just connecting and fun. And I think the biggest takeaway for me this time, being with them and observing what their takeaways were, is just how important it is that we put in our very best in creating a good partnership marriage. A lot of times we look to our spouse and their deficiencies, and they're the reason why X, Y, or Z is not happening. And so we tend to focus on solving the problem by trying to fix our spouse. And when you do that, your anxiety is going to skyrocket because you're trying to solve a problem over something that you don't have direct control over. In the end, the only person you have control over is yourself. So when you can kind of turn that back and really look at yourself, and we teach all these skills at our retreat, how to do this. But
And I'm going to repeat that really quick so no one missed that. The only thing we can control is ourselves. And
yes,
if we're pointing out our partner's deficiencies and flaws without any accountability or ownership for how we're showing up, we're not getting anywhere.
exactly. Right, right. Yeah. And on that too, I believe marriages are a system, meaning intimate marriages are a system. So what one person does affects the other in some sort of a way. Kind of
Yes.
like a ballroom dance, like a waltz, for example. You take a step, the other person takes a step back, the follower leader, whatever you want to see. So we get in these certain patterns often. So the better you are at identifying what your patterns are, and then seeing a new dance step you can do instead that's maybe healthier or more constructive, then you just practice the new pattern when you see yourself triggered or stepping into the old pattern.
Well,
So we teach couples how to do that too.
what you're describing is basically an aspect of the dance that all couples do, which is utilize an EFT. As a psychotherapist, that's kind of something I work with couples on. And that dance, your terminology is so accurate because if people would look at it that way, I think there's automatically a sense of, oh, everybody does this. There's push and pull in every relationship. There's a pursuer and a withdrawer in every relationship. And you get this comfort level to recognize it's not just about me, but I can be responsible for me. My partner can be responsible for them, and we can actually change the dance we're doing. And it doesn't have to be this predictable cycle. It doesn't have to be this repetitive disaster. We can actually change the whole way we interact. And then that blossoms how we interact intimately as well.
Yes, love that. And it only takes one to start
That's
the
right.
process. It does. You don't have to wait for your spouse to make the dance step changes. You can do it yourself, and that's the beauty of the concept, I think.
Well, because when a new environment is created in that way, the other person will follow. Because when we sense, and this is human nature, when we sense, oh, my partner is shifting and changing and they're doing this and it's new, why are they doing that? There's an immediate, even if your immediate might be distrust, like, what are they doing? You're still curious. You're still curious to see what's going to happen. And so I agree with that completely. It only takes one person to start to make a subtle shift to have the entire relationship structure shift. And that
Yeah,
doesn't matter if it's how you interact just relationally or how you're interacting intimately as well.
right. There was a period of time in our marriage when we were in a rut sexually, and it was very easy for me to blame my spouse for why we're in the rut. She just doesn't do this. She just doesn't initiate enough. She doesn't like, I can just make the list really long if I wanted to. And at that time, I was talking to a friend, and he was telling me about his business coach that he had hired. And this business coach, when he had signed up, had promised all of these things and everything. And now, fast forward to our conversation, he's really disgruntled with this particular business coach. Well, we're not at this level, and we're not doing this, we're not doing this, we're not doing this. He's just naming all the problems with this particular business coach. And I'm looking at my friend like, but you didn't do anything. You expected the business coach to write every copy. You expect the business coach to be your Instagram person. Like, you've got responsibility of things you need to do yourself too. And at that moment, it was like, I saw the parallel in my own marriage. Like, it's so easy for me to blame my spouse for the things that aren't happening when there's still clearly things that I justified my lack of participation in it because of her limitations,
Mhm.
right? But there's so much more I could be doing. And I was out of town at the moment. And so I sent a message to my wife over our Just Between Us app. And I this is out of character for me, but I said, "Hey, I heard your husband's out of town." And she wrote back saying, "Yeah, no one else is home right now. Want to come over?"
Love it.
So we're having this playful, like, completely, we're role playing right now.
It's fun.
And that was like the moment. It was like, there's still, even though we're apart, there's still stuff I can do that I can take responsibility on. So it's really up to me to do my part. And I'm so grateful to be married to a wonderful woman who picked up on that, and she stepped into the new dance with me, right? But it would have been so easy for me to send a different message, right? I wish you would initiate more often, or whatever my complaint might have been, right? Very, very different energy, because I'm shifting the responsibility off of me onto her, thinking it'll feel better. But really, it was my responsibility to at least do something. So,
And I agree with you on that. I hear so many couples that say, oh, my spouse doesn't initiate, so we're just not having sex because I'm done trying. I'm done being the person that always makes the move. My question is always, well, what kind of move are you making? Are you making a move that's creating an environment for that partner to be like, this is so fun. I want to do it again. Let me initiate next time. Or are you creating an environment where both of you are going through the motions and it's the same old thing and nothing is new or exciting and nobody feels safe to talk about anything, but yet you expect your partner to suddenly say, where do I sign up? That was so great. Let me do it again. It's a big picture thing that has to be looked at. And I don't think a lot of people see it that way, but I think it's imperative to see it that way.
yeah, absolutely. You gotta do your part to
That's
make it
right.
inviting. It's got to be more interesting than Netflix or folding laundry. You gotta make it great.
And it takes two to tango. I mean, it really
Uh,
does. There's two people in that situation. What are you both
mm,
or
right.
not?
Yeah, exactly.
A lot
Have
of
sex worth
that way.
having. That's important.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I wanted to ask you, you talk about giving couples tools. Is there any specific other tools, something that you feel like when you started implementing that and you started really approaching it in that way, that you saw a big shift?
Oh, there's so many. Maybe a few that I can leave for your listeners. One that's made a big impact on me is just this concept that as humans, we're embodied people, and we can use our bodies to help make changes. Our brains are very plastic. You hear neuroplasticity. And the
Correct.
times when we're most capable of change in our minds to forge new neural pathways is when we're not in fight or flight or triggered, or, as you
Yes.
say, the trauma response, right?
Responses, that's right.
It's the opposite. It's when we're kind of relaxed and kind of enjoying ourselves, kind of moving into that. And I believe really good sex requires a person to be able to be calmed down enough themselves that they can really tune in to their spouse in the moment. A lot of couples will go through the motions of sex, but it's really disconnected because there's so much anxiety in it that one of the ways they protect themselves in the anxiety is to disconnect.
Yes.
That's how they manage if this is too close, right? Too intimate. So they
Freeze
disconnect.
or
So
freeze or flight immediately.
yeah, exactly. They might get through the motions. They might even have orgasms, but is it an intimate experience where you experience that neuroplastic brain where you're really close? So getting into that, like step by step and how to do it. And I get this idea from Dr. David Schnarch, and he gives a specific practice to certain couples called hugging until relaxed. And I love this. So we did this, my wife and I did it a few years ago we picked September is our Sextember. And we would pick a goal and we'd try to
Oh,
go
I
after
love
it.
that, Dan, that's
Yeah.
great.
And what
Wonderful.
we decided for this particular Sextember was every other night we're going to do the hugging exercise. And let me explain what it is. So you you do this fully clothed. I mean, you can do it undressed if you want to, but the idea is you're going to hug for 8 to 10 minutes. And for you listening to this, it's going to sound really difficult. It's really hard to hug someone for 8 to 10 minutes, right? There's not a lot of talking going on or whatever, but your goal in those 8 to 10 minutes while hugging is two things. One is to calm yourself down. That's like to really settle yourself down, whether it's breathing practices or scanning your five senses or whatever method works for you to really like calm yourself down. And goal number two is to be really in tune with your spouse. Can you really tune into them and their experience? And it's these dual, I think, these it pushes on these dual mechanisms that we as humans have. We have this drive for attachment and we have this drive for autonomy. So the calming yourself down is your drive for autonomy, and your attunement is your drive for attachment. So you're learning how to balance the interplay of these two things within you. And after you hug for 8 to 10 minutes, the timer goes off, you're done, and then you can debrief. And what's fascinating is the way you hug in those 8 to 10 minutes is a microcosm of your sex life. Does one person tend to really lean on the other person and the other person feels like suffocated by the other? Well, maybe that's the way your sex life tends to be. Or is even getting through even a minute of a hug just too much and that's hard? Or do you have a hard time calming yourself down in it? Or is one person like loving it because it's like, oh, I'm finally getting touched by my spouse who doesn't touch me very often. And the other person's like, ew, gross, just step back. Like, just do it. That's also a microcosm of maybe your sex life is. So it's a great tool to practice, I think, for couples because it strengthens those muscles of how you balance that attachment and autonomy while really settling down with your bodies up close to another person. Because when you can involve your body in learning, it forges new neural pathways much faster than just simply talking about it. So it's involving your body in that practice.
I'm hearing so many great things with that. I'm hearing co-regulation, matching that energy of our partner in that moment, being able to slow our bodies down, that somatic connection with our body. We're actually doing body scans to know, how are we feeling? Are we feeling vulnerable? Are we feeling scared? Do we want to run? Are we feeling good? That's a huge part of that. And I also hear that there's so much self-reflection going on, which I love. I think that's really an awesome tool, and I hope so many of these listeners might try that. I think it's great.
There's a lot packed into that 8 to 10 minutes, or
Sure.
8 to 10 minutes, isn't there? Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that you have been a wealth of information, and I personally am going to check out this app. I think it's going to be really fun to see what that's like. And I'm really grateful for all of the information you've shared. I think so many of your listeners are going to get so much out of this. I want to wrap up by posing you a question. We always have something we do here on the Redhead Reveal podcast where the prior guest leaves a question for the future guest. And a prior guest asked, what would you tell your 20-year-old self about dating, knowing what you know now?
So I would tell my 20-year-old self about dating is to just chill out and relax, and there's no need to rush. I tended to think there's a timeline here. I needed to find a spouse by a certain period of time, and it was mostly driven by maybe circumstances. I was going to go back to college, or I was in college, I'd take a summer off, and like whatever timeline you give yourself, when you rush into things, you're more likely to make mistakes. So take your time really dating to really get to know the person and get to know their family really well, and let them get to know your own family very well. Because, a few years down the road, you will see how those family of origin patterns influence the way you're trying to create a marriage together. And so the better understanding you have going into it, the better decisions you can make after you're married. So I guess those are two answers.
Well, you're speaking my language on both of those. I couldn't agree more. I love that answer. I think you're awesome, Dan. Tell me what your question is you want to leave for a future guest.
My question is, so we talked about building intimacy with tools. I gave the hugging to relaxed exercise as an example. My question for the next person is, what tools have you incorporated in your relationships that help you build and forge a stronger intimate connection with your partner?
Love that. I can't wait to hear what that answer is going to be. And everybody tune in for that answer. And again, thank you, Dan Purcell, for joining us today.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer.
I can't wait to hear what you're doing next.
All right. Thanks.
All right, talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in accelerating growth in your marriage, either sexually, emotionally, or spiritually, I want to invite you to work with me in my affordable coaching program called Next Level. More information about Next Level and my fun and sexy apps for couples are available at getyourmarriageon.com. Please also don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And be sure to tell your married friends. I promise, they will thank you for life. Now go get your marriage on.